Good afternoon to all. It's my great pleasure to be a moderator of this webinar. My name is Alen Mujinovic, and I'm a teaching assistant at the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Science at the University of Sarajevo. And I'm also a working group leader in a course section that is organizing this today's webinar. Today with us, there's one presenter, Michelle Perello, who is going to introduce herself later on and present her work. And before we start with her presentation, I am just going to briefly present our cost action, what we are doing, what we did so far. So let me just tell you that right now we are more than 100 members participating in a cost action with representation of 33 countries. Our goal, or the goal of the action, is to establish the network with inclusive multi-stakeholder representation of different countries. Second goal is to foster knowledge, skills, and best practice exchange. And you're going to see that from our output that we already achieved this goal. And the third goal that we are working on is to develop the Rural Needs Online Observatory. How we are organized? We are organized in 4 different working groups. Working group 1 related to the social networks and social inclusion. Working group 2 related to the formal and non-formal education. Third working group is related to the employment and services in rural areas. And the fourth working group is a group dedicated to the rural needs and sustainability. I would like to highlight that all of you could join the our cost action and to join the specific working group if you are interested. What we achieved so far, we achieved several publications, several scientific publications, but also policy briefs and manuals. Some of them are presented here. We also delivered 2 special issues in a Journal of Sustainability and also in a Journal of Youth and Society. Policy brief that I mentioned are presented on this slide. Currently, we are organizing or preparing to organize the conference that will be held in Brescia in September. So I would like to invite all of you to take the participation in this conference. And with this this is my final slide, and I will leave the question and answer session for the end. Now, it's my great pleasure to invite Michelle Perello. Michelle Perello is a freelancer consultant. She was working as a freelancer consultant in European Union programs and funding. Back in 2009, she established her own company named Consulta Europa Project and Innovations. And right now, she is leading communication and dissemination activities of the ruralization projects. She's a holder of master degree in international and diplomatic sciences and also hold a PhD degree in production and management and design at Politecnico di Torino University, working as an external evaluator for the European Commission, assisting in research institutes, universities, small and medium enterprises in the design, development and management of research and technology development and innovation projects, and policymakers in the design of innovation supporting policies. Her main research interests are regional and European innovation policies, social and gendered innovation, business and innovation models. Now, Michelle, I would like to invite you to deliver your presentation.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to share with you the work that we have been doing in the Ruralization project. I think you can see my screen. So I will present you 2 main results and 2 main activities of this project, Ruralization, which title is The Opening of Rural Areas to Renew Rural Generations, Jobs and Farms. The project is a project which started on May 2019 and will end in 2023. It's a €6 million project funded under the Horizon 2020 program. You see here the consortium that composed the project. The project is led by the University of Delft in the Netherlands by Professor Willem Cortas Altes. And we count on a really big partnership with across Europe, basically. And the work that I will present today has been in particular coordinated by the University of Turku in Finland and by the team of Professor Tuomas Komonen. So what is our perspective? Basically, we focus in ruralization on the issue that there is, of course, as we all know, a big trend of population decline in rural areas on one side, and also of decline of GDP in general and GDP per head. But on the other side, we also focus on the fact that there are problems with access to land. So we, based on statistics, we know that 3% of farms basically cultivate 52% of available land, which means that there is really not a possibility for all the people that potentially could access to land and so organize their life in rural areas to have the opportunity to access land and develop their business. So we basically join the statistics on population decline and on access to land and translate these needs into the objective of our project, which are basically to create more opportunities for new generations. And we will see that we address these opportunities in different way. And in this way, we basically aim at making available for more young people the creation of a new life, of a professional and personal life in rural area. So in this sense, we can say that the project really targets specifically young people across Europe and aim at regenerating rural areas by making more young people relocating to rural areas. We identify in particular 3 types of new generations coming to rural area. So new generation that can contribute to rural development, which are newcomers, new entrants into farming, and successors. So newcomers are people who come from the countryside, who come to the countryside from other regions, from outside the region, from outside the rural areas. Mostly those people come from the city and decide to relocate to rural area to work or to establish their business there. Then we have a second type of new generation, which are new entrants into farming, which are people who start a new farm or take over an existing farm from another owners, from another family, from other people. In most cases, these people are newcomers. So it's people that are relocating from outside the rural area to start a new farming activities. But it's true that sometimes it's people who are already in the neighborhood and decide to take over the farm. And then the third group of people we target in ruralization are the successors. So people that in this case take over a farm from their family, from their parents, or as part of a family business. And we decided, when we developed the project, we realized that we had to consider these 3 different types of new generations, because of course they need different policy responses and their needs are different. So how did we structure the work? We devoted, I would say, the first year almost to build the framework for research and innovation. In this work, we define what we meant by rural development, by rural regeneration. We define well the profiles that I just described. So we structure the conceptual understanding of rural development and rural regeneration. And then we had 3 main core activities, I would say, 3 main work packages. The first one is about foresight analysis to identify opportunities. And so we define trends that I will present today, and we'll define also personal futures. So the dreams of young people with respect to rural areas that I will present also today. Then we have work on facilitating rural newcomers and new entrants into farming by developing case studies and best practices. And then we focus specifically on concrete tools to provide access to land. So these three main areas of activity, I would say, have been the core activities of the project, and the results of all the research and innovation activities in these three areas has been feeding a work of policy design, policy assessment, policy recommendations. So this has been somehow the structure of the work that we have been implementing so far. And for the first part of the first area of activity, we have performed these trends analysis, and we have created inventories of future dreams of the youth, which I will present more in detail afterward. For the rural newcomers and new entrants into farming, we have also performed an analysis of cases of of literature results and of concrete cases, concrete practices. And then we have selected specific case studies on promising practices. So we have really worked with stakeholders, with the farmers, with young people in rural areas. And we have identified 30 case studies that we have studied more in detail. 10 case studies on rural newcomers, 10 case studies are on new entrants into farming, and the last 10 are on successes. Then we have, out of these promising practices, we have also created confrontations with other practices which have been less promising. So we have identified other contexts, other practices, and we have made confrontations to understand why the promising practices have been effectively and successful with respect to the other one, so that we could again take out recommendations for policymakers on how to facilitate rural newcomers, new entrants, and successors. Then the third area is access to land. And for this area, we have started with an analysis of all legal and policy arrangements in 28 European member states. We have studied how access to land is regulated and granted in the different states. And then we have selected 8 specific arrangements that we think are more relevant, more promising, and more useful, so that we could also provide recommendation on those. Then we have also made an analysis of land holdings and land market trends to understand what is the situation and what is expected to occur in the future. And again, we have analyzed and collected novel innovative practices on access to land. So in this case, we have studied what has been different or innovative with respect to new ways of accessing land individually or jointly by different type of actors. And based on that, we have developed ideas for novel practices of access to land. And as I was saying before, the idea of all this research work is that we will be able to provide contribution for policy making, not only at European level, but also at national level. So we are still in the process of producing most of the deliverables related with the policy recommendations. These deliverables include a good practice guide for rural newcomers and new entrants into farming, a handbook for policymakers, and then different policy briefs and policy recommendations that we will submit and develop. So we can go more into the detail of one of the main topic of today's presentation, which are the trends. Why did we perform this extensive work on trends? Because of course, rural regeneration has to see with the future. So with what we expect to happen, or we wish and we want to facilitate happening in the next year. So to do this, basically, we had to identify and access alternative futures, possible futures, through a foresight analysis exercise. And in this sense, we address trends on one side, so general expected futures, and dreams, which are a personal expected future of people. When it comes to the trends analysis, it is very important before we start going more into the detail of this work, that we clarify that this work is an explorative work, it's not a normative work, and it's a descriptive work, and it aims at being inspiring and not instructing. So the work that has been done is aimed at trying to provide a potential vision, overview of what could be the future and how rural areas will be affected by these different trends. So describe potential situation in a way to inspire policymakers on how to address those situations. How did we proceed? Basically, we started with the very extensive research on done in literature, by the work on the work done by other projects on different initiatives, both at European level, so general level, but also at the national level. So we have been reviewing accessible materials in English, but also in national language. So all the partners have been involved in this work, because we wanted to start with identifying a certain number of trends that could be relevant for rural areas in general. So we started with this very huge collection of potential trends, and then we have been categorizing and analyzing those trends based on the frequency or the potential to occur of those trends, and on their wideness or intensity, meaning in terms of how many areas, how many regions would this trend effectively actually affect or impact. So based on that, we have made an analysis and a selection to transform all the knowledge of all those trends into a limited number of trends. And we have built like trends card that are like really a card game that we should help researchers and policymakers in understanding what could be the future of rural areas. We identified at the beginning more than 1,500 trends, and then through the selection, the work, the analysis, the categorization, we ended up with 60 trend cards. These 60 trends cards are differentiated between megatrends, trends, and weak signals. So megatrends can be seen like big waves which affect everybody, so which will move all of us somehow, and which are like overarching mainstream that will affect most regions and activities. These are megatrends. Then we have trends which are like more smaller, like local streams or river, that are effective in specific regions or will affect specific activities related to rural areas, but not most of the territory and not most of the activities. And then we have weak signals, which are like a smell in the wind, a message in a bottle, like symptoms of change which affect a specific region or a specific activity. What is important to say is that this differentiation, this categorization of trend can evolve and can change, because trends are not like a stable, fixed phenomenon. So you see here, for instance, how trends can evolve from the short run, which is a time perspective of 10 years from now to the next 10 years, and the long run, which is from the next 10 to 30 years. So you see, for instance, that in the short run, we have this trend of unequal development and inequality, which is likely to decrease in importance or in impact in the long run, while, for instance, climate change that you see here is as the fourth, let's say, position, will become in the long run the first position, and so on. So you see that we have some trends which are expected also to decrease in importance, like this one in the list that you see at the bottom of the list, like on succession, policy incidence and effectiveness, accessibility, aging farmer population. And other that are expected to increase in importance, like the sustainability transition, environmentalism, resource competition, biodiversity loss, and so on. So it is important that we keep this in mind so that trends are not fixed but can evolve in order that we take into account also for policy objectives. So as I said before, we created these trends cards. The team of Professor Kumonen found out that this format could be the most effective one, and indeed it has been a success. The European Commission has been very interested in this work and in this type of formats as for policy recommendations. So you see here how a trend card look like in the short version. You have the title of the trend, you have a kind of short description with keywords of what this trend would be. So in this case, we see a rural lifestyle with some keywords associated to this trend, which is this ideal of the rural ideal related to availability of space, nature, peace, animals, housing, safety, traditions, and communities. So you have this short description, you have a description of the type of the trend. So if it is a megatrend, a trend, or a weak signal, and most common drivers. So what is supporting, what is feeding this trend? So like in this case, the wish or this desire for a slow, peaceful, and natural lifestyle, health concerns of people in general, and what could be the most common impacts of this trend. So what would be the result when these trends become a reality? So that the rural places in this case and areas become more attractive, and so we might have a diversification of rural economies, a increase in social cultural diversity, and so on. So here you see how the short version of a trend card look like. And here you see a more detailed long version, which includes also other information like the domain of the train, which particular rural sector must be more impacted by this trend, the significance for the rural areas, the impacts organized across different areas, like for instance, gender impact on social capital, migration impacts, and so far. And also you might have, not for all the trends, like maps highlighting where we expect this trend, which areas we expect this trend would impact more. So this is the long version of the cards. And the idea is that these cards are a tool, so that needs really to be used and not only to be read. So the idea is how can you use the cards? And we propose as a possibility like to ask questions. So when you take a card and use this card, you should ask yourself, according if you are a policy makers or you are an entrepreneurs, a new entrants, or even a researcher, but the idea is that these are really for stakeholders, how to benefit from the trend in my location, in my region, in my country, or again, if you're a policymaker, how to benefit from the trend in my decision making, or if you are an entrepreneur, how to benefit from this trend in my business or in my economic sector, or if you are from a civil society organization, how to benefit in my network, and so on. So the idea is that for each card, you can ask your question to understand based on this trend, how you should reorient or adapt your choices. It is the second option to use the card is to use the let's say longer version of the card, and for instance concentrating on the impacts that are highlighted and described in the cards. And based also on your field of activity, you can decide to focus on any of the specific impact that have been studied and highlighted in the cards. So let's go more into the detail of the trends, and let's start with these mega trends. So we have here the first mega trend that has been highlighted is the aging population. We all know that the average age of the population is very high, and in particular is increasing in many rural regions, which generates a higher demand for specific services related to the older population. Of course, drivers, you see here, the drivers are the demographic change, globalization, economic growth, etc. And the impact of these mega trends are the expansion of the silver economy, which means that there are more demand for specific services like health and care services, but also that there might be an evolution of farms, or the organization of farms, or the evolution in how farms might be reorganized individually or jointly. And also an important impact has to see with migration from rural to urban areas, based on the fact that there might be a lack of services in rural areas. The second trend we identified is the globalization, and we wanted to address not globalization in itself, but how we could benefit from globalization, meaning finding the ways to benefit from open markets and specialization, instead of focusing on the adverse effects of globalization, which could be impact that affect rural areas. In this case, for instance, an increased export demand for sustainable food products, the fact that large farms will become more and more dominant, and that there might be also evolution of other rural businesses based on globalization. Another trend, mega trend, is again urbanization, and again we adopted this positive approach of looking at how we could benefit from urbanization. In this sense, we see that the increase of cities in terms of people and land use make rural more rare and valuable. So we will see also when we describe the youth dreams, that the urbanization process might generate a higher desire of moving to rural areas, because they present more positive aspects with respect to cities. Then we have a fourth mega trend, which is caring for the environment, which is all these big movement composed of ideologies, policies, and practices aim at reduce environmental degradation, aim at safeguarding the environment, biodiversity, and in general improve the status of the environment. What is the impact in this case? Mitigation of climate change, having a better, more sustainable use of resources, a reduction of degradation, and an increase in environmental conservation. Related to this caring for the environment megatrend, we have, of course, the megatrend of climate change. That I think I do not need to comment much, apart from the fact that in this case, we consider again the impact for rural area, which might generate more demand for rural raw materials, more demand for ecological, affordable, and safe rural housing, and so on. Other mega trends is counteracting unequal development and rural decline. We have observed that there are general efforts to halt the vicious circle of rural decline, so less population, less services, less infrastructure, which of course affect the marginalized rural areas. And this megatrend, of course, should contribute as impact more equal and inclusive social fabric. So more participation of new generation into rural areas, halting rural decline, and facilitating the creation of new infrastructure and new services in rural areas. Another megatrend has to see with growing food demand. So which is the fact that there is an increase in the global food demand, which is expected and is linked, of course, is expected to grow connected to the population growth. And then another megatrend is the megatrend on infrastructure, accessibility, and connectedness of the region. So the fact that more roads, railways, water, electricity, telecommunication infrastructure will be necessary for both settlement and economic activities. Okay, the last two megatrends are the one on migration patterns, so national and international migration flows, which will affect, of course, both urban and rural areas. And the last is sustainability transition. So this phenomenon of transformation towards more sustainable production and consumption models and practices, in particular for food, energy, construction, and mobility. And of course, this transition will affect rural areas in different ways, generating more demand for rural material, mitigating climate change, and facilitating the growth of local rural economies. So these are the megatrends that we expect to affect most of rural areas in Europe. While you see here trends which are expected to affect not all the regions in Europe, but again, many territories. I will not go as much into detail of the trends as I have done for the megatrends because lack of time, but all the trends, the description are available both on the Ruralization website at ruralisation.eu and on the ruraltrends.eu website, which has been developed specifically for this trends card. So when it comes to trends, we see here, for instance, alternative food system. So this new diverse food system that have been organized usually by community to deliver, for instance, local food production or a more sustainable and healthy food model, and which are challenging the dominant food regime. Another trend is the trend of changing gender roles, which see a kind of slow but progressive evolution from traditional gender roles to more modern and shared gender roles in private life and working life. The trend of circular economy, which is so this economic model based on recycling, reuse, sharing, and repair of previously extracted and used material. The trend of digital economy, the trend of the diversification of rural economy, for which many rural regions have started diversifying their economy from the, let's say, agricultural model to other business activities. Diversification and specialization of farms, for which farms are not only devoting to agriculture any longer, but are integrating their agricultural activities with other activities like education, tourism, and so on. Another trend is the trend of e-commerce. So the development of online markets, which made not necessary any longer the physical presence to to purchase or to sell products. Then another trend is the trend of food security, which has to see with having food available at all times and in different conditions, including under crisis, specific crisis related to weather or wars and so on. Food tourism is another trend, meaning specific touristic activities organized around food, like festivals, routes, tours, and other type of events. Another trend is the trend of local paradigm. So the idea of that this tendency to value more what is locally produced, so having a more territorial, holistic, and integrative approach, which promote decentralization and local autonomy. Another trend is the manifestation of new technologies like artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, blockchain, big data, virtual and augmented reality, Internet of Things, and so on. Then we have the meaning and experience economy. So again, these new activities, which could be touristics or related to cultural sector, which value the experience of the customers. Then multifunctional forest is another trend. So the use of forests for economic, social, environmental, and cultural purposes. Then we have a trend which is policy incidence and effectiveness. So the challenge of having effective policy design and delivery in service of several objectives. So the fact that the design of policies is also evolving in this sense to be more effective. Another trend is the trend of remote work and the trend of rural business succession. Then we have rural in the social media. So the fact that there is a higher and increasing presence, visibility, and profiling of rural activities or rural actors and places in the social media platforms. Rural tourism is another trend. Technology-intensive farming is another trend. And then we have the transparency of the food system as another trend. So you see here all the trends that we have identified based on this research which has been done. As a matter of fact, please take into account that we started from 1,500 general trends, and we try to make a selection based on how much the trend that were highlighted somehow recur or could impact more regions in Europe. Let's go to the weak signals, which are, as I said, like small, like smell symptoms of change, something that is not still very strong to be considered a trend, but which exists and has been spotted by our researchers. One weak signal is the care services. So the fact that there are more diverse services which are emerging, like green care, home care, telemedicine, mobile service, so which might affect rural areas. Then another weak signal is cheap rural housing and rural second homes. So the fact that there are more people searching for rural houses as second home in most cases. So there is this entry of new inhabitants to rural areas which purchase a home, for instance. Then cooperative and partnerships, so the new organization models to reach economy of scales and to facilitate mutual interest. Linked to this, another weak signal is the one of community-based action, so community-based initiatives that serve shared interests or shared capacities, or that somehow address needs and of a certain community. Creative economies, another weak signal. Degrowth as antithesis to economic growth paradigm is also a weak signal. The do-it-yourself movement, so the repair movement, crafting movement, is another weak signal highlighted, as well the eco-villages, so these settlement communities which aim at integrating all the four dimensions of sustainable development, so the economic, social, environmental, and cultural in one rural settlement. Educational farms, food sovereignty. I go a bit more farther, not to steal too much time. Heritage tourism, so tourism linked to cultural heritage. Integration of immigrants. Micro and small units, referring in this case to small farms or businesses or specific civic organizations which are very small, but which are being established more and more. multi-local living, so seasonal or periodic living in urban and rural residences, natural and cultural heritage, and new governance models, pandemics and epidemics, place branding, pop-up culture and gig economy, public goods, resilience, rural artisans, rural energy communities, rural hubs, rural lifestyle, search for better quality of life, self-sufficiency, sharing economy, smart solution in rural space, and social enterprises and entrepreneurs. So you see that we have, of course, more weak signals, because these are signals that have been maybe are stronger in a specific area or Euro in a specific type of regions and less stronger in other. But I'm pretty sure that most of you are familiar with all these signals. You might have identified those in your personal life or in your work. But are trends which are not very strong yet. Of course, these trends, these weak signals, might become trends in the coming years, as well as some of the trends that we have seen might become weak signals or might evolve into mega trend in the coming years. So what is important in this respect is that every trend has an end, so it's at a certain point it will evolve, and at a certain point it will stop, it will finish, and also that the context matters. As I said before, some specific weak signals might be extremely important in the southern region, for instance, of Europe, while other might be less important. Some signals might be, some trends might affect particular intermediate rural regions, and other might affect much more remote rural areas. So it is important to take this into account. And I don't know if it's possible, but I would propose that if we collect questions on trends now, before I move to the dreams inventory, if there are any. I don't know if in the chat there are some questions.
Yeah, right now we don't have the questions in a chat box, but if the participants want to ask the question, then they are free to go. I do have small questions.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, how did you rate the trends? Like,
rate? You mean we didn't make a rating? We just make a categorization between mega trends, and weak signals. So there is not, for instance, a most important trend. So you see numerous like number for the cards, but it's not like a priority number. Okay. So we only differentiate among these three categories based on the recurrence of the trend. So based on for each of the 1,560 trends identified, we ask ourselves how much this trend recur in different regions across Europe. And so based on that, it was decided if this trend would be a mega trend or a weak signals. So this was how they were categorized, but it was not like a priority.
Okay, okay, great, thank you.
Welcome. There are no other questions, I suppose. So I will move to dreams inventory. I am not seeing the time. So Alan, if you can prevent me if I'm going out of time, I would appreciate.
Okay, okay.
So as for the dream, basically the idea that we wanted in this case was to address like not general future, but like personal future. So meaning what we expect people to what are the expectation of people in terms of their future, with the idea that the policies should somehow also facilitate the accomplishment of these dreams, and in particular in this case for rural areas, because those should contribute to rural regeneration. So how did we proceed in this case? We we work in the 10 member states that are partner in the project. And for each member state, we select 2 regions to work with. So you see here for each of the member states, the region in which we work. And when I say we work, means from where we basically interact with young people to compile the study. So you see we had Ireland, Netherlands, France, Spain, Finland, Germany, Poland, Hungary, Romania, and Italy. And we work not only with rural areas, but also with urban areas, because as a matter of fact, we wanted to assess which could be the dream of young people living in urban area as well. So we work with predominantly urban region and intermediate region. And to build this dream inventory, we basically address 3 types we ask young people to think about what would be their livelihood recipe. So how they expect to earn their living in a period until 2035. How do you expect, where do they expect to live, in which type of place, which type of neighborhood, which type of house, and this is the accommodation recipe, and also what is the lifestyle they expect to have. And why we organize it across these 3 areas, because we think these 3 areas are directly linked to 3 main policy domains, which are the domain of housing, employment, and welfare and leisure policies. And also we have asked young people what are the obstacles they expect or they think they will have to face while in realizing their dream. So we have basically invited more than 2,000 young people to answer a survey. Initially, when we started the project, we wanted to have a big survey, physical interviews and workshops. Then COVID-19 came, so we had to skip the physical workshops and physical interviews. So the result is based mainly on the surveys and some online interviews. We surveyed more than 2,000 young people. You see here the current place of residence of those people. So we have city center, city area outside the city center, suburb in a city area, and rural area close to a city, so at a commuting distance. Rural village, you don't see it here, but it's rural village, remote and remote rural area. So you see here where these young people we surveyed are living and where they would like to live, what is their dream place of residence. And what is, I think, more interesting, even if this is not a prediction, because we acknowledge that we have sample selection bias, but we think it was an interesting result. The fact that there are, in any case, a less general, lower desire of living in the city, as you see here in the upper part of the graphic, and there is a higher desire of living in a rural area close to a city, so at commuting distance from the city. So this is the first insight or result of the inventory. And basically what we did was, once we had the results of all the survey of all the young people, we tried to compare those to be able to define profiles of the rural dream of young people. So profiles of where and how young people are expected or willing to live in the future. So we have the profile of the people, the young people willing to live, for instance, in the city center. And these are kind of rather young people that give a high priority to have a style of life which prioritize mobility, participation to events, internationalization, international network, international context, a type of creative and very active lifestyle. You see here that for each profile, we define what is the 3 recipe that people would like to create or would like to have for their life, with respect to how they will earn their life and where they expect to live, and what is the type of activities, hobbies, values of behaviors that they expect to have in the future. So we see here the cases for the city center, the city area outside the center. In this second case, are young people who value a communal, cozy, and more stable life in the urban fabric, which again gives an important and allows mobility, internationality, and personal development in diverse ways. And then we move little by little to the categories of people willing to live, for instance, still in a suburb in a city area, which are young people which value more having a peaceful but still flexible lifestyle, which is a home-centric basic form of living. So which do not value that much mobility and activity, but rather having the center of their activities around their home. And then we move to this group, which I highlighted as more interesting for our purposes for the issue of rural regeneration, which is the group of people willing to move to a rural area close to a city. So which are young people who show a preference for a countryside as a living environment because of availability of waters, animals, private space, garden, children, and so whose life is also whose work life is subordinate to this choice of a rural lifestyle. How these people expect to earn their life? Basically, the economic activities that have been identified are related to water supply, sewage, waste management, remediation activities, construction sector, real estate activities, manufacturing, transportation, and storage. These are the activities that from the surveys emerge as potential type of working activities of people, of young people working in this rural area. As I said at the beginning, this is explorative results. It's not, so for sure there might be other sectors, but it gives us already an idea of what do these people expect to work on. Also, when it comes to the house, for instance, the desire of the young people is to have a large yard, the possibility to keep animals, having the possibility of have their own yard, and that could be whole houses which are refurbished or renovated, houses which usually do not have neighbors close by, but could be, for instance, located close to a water environment like sea, lake, or river, and of course in the countryside. What are the obstacles that, for instance, young people see in being able to move to a rural areas close to a city? The working conditions, so for instance, lack of flexibility, the precariousness. They have identified, of course, the coronavirus pandemic or other pandemics as a potential obstacle then to organize, to perform their working activities. Potential external events like sickness or accidents, so something that could affect the fact that they are not living in a city. And also the fact that for personal reasons, like their life partners or for the reasons of the family, they could not move there. Why it is important that we consider this type of obstacles? Because these are those type of obstacles that maybe policy makers should think of and address in order to sustain the choice of young people towards these rural dreams. Let's go then to the other profile, the profile of rural village. We see here that people willing to live in a rural village have highlighted as potential economic activities, those related to transportation and storage, agriculture, forestry and fishing, wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles, motorcycle, or activities related to electricity, gas, steam, and air conditioning supply, accommodation and food service activities, administrative and support service activities, and education. So these are the activities that the young people surveyed expect to perform as working activities. When it comes to the accommodation, people are thinking of moving to a village or a small town and to live either in a farmhouse or old house or semi-detached house. So in this case, it was no really mentioning of not having neighbor close, but on the other side, they are expected to live still in a kind of community. And when it comes to obstacle, for instance, an issue was finding a suitable and affordable place or house, limitation of the dream location, so limitation in terms of availability of jobs or availability of houses or services, and also some concerns, some obstacles were related to the effect of climate change in the rural village, so in their potential location where they would like to live in. So for this type of profile, we have this manifestation of the local paradigm in a rural fabric. So the idea is that the people living there are valuing local foods and services, are valuing the idea of self-sufficiency, the idea of social interaction, of creating community, the idea of living in a green and nature-based environment. So this is what the lifestyle that these young people are looking for. Then we move to I would say the more extreme profile of young people, and is the one of those that would like to live in remote rural area. And in this idea is of really people willing to be connected with nature, so living in the nature and with nature. And so also the economic activities of these young people are either directly related to the use of nature for earning their living, so agriculture, forestry and fishing, or activities again related to water supply, sewage, waste management. On the other side, accommodation and food service activities, so relating more to generate tourism, or financial and insurance activities, because of course in this case the idea is that these people are expecting to be work remotely. What are the obstacles that they see here in this case? Are obstacles related to more to regulation, to difficulties in, for instance, being able to perform their economic activities due to some regulation or taxes, or specific policies that would not support their establishment of their business. And the other main concern has to see with, of course, not being able to have a sustainable economic source, so the lack of insufficiency of money. And also another obstacle has to see with linked to the idea of living somehow isolated, and so how this could affect their personal stability and personal development. So this is the more extreme profile of people. And all this profile, what are the relevance for? The idea is that both the trends and the dream inventory, they are not giving us like the magic recipe to sustain regeneration. And as I said before, we need to take both the trends and the dream inventory in consideration into context. So understanding the contextuality in rural development, transition, transformation. But of course, they are giving us some hints on how we could shape specific policies to facilitate rural regeneration and rural development in general. It is important to highlight that many trends had an impact on the social capital, so which is could be one of the key issues in the trends. So how we can create social capital in rural areas. And another important insight was that many of the weak signals coincide with the future dreams of the youth. So the weak signals of cheap rural housing and rural second homes, or the signals of community-based action for the people, for instance, coincide with the dream of people living in rural villages, for instance. The weak signals of creative economy and the growth and do-it-yourself movement or rural lifestyle, all those weak signals indeed coincide with this profile of people willing to live in rural village or in rural remote areas. So in this sense, the recommendation is to take those into account and to acknowledge that there are some trends that could be supported and sustained through policy instruments. So I finished my presentation. I have no idea if I have run out of time or if I have...
You are perfectly on time. That's
great. So there was, I know it's a lot of information, try to be resumed, and it's been a really a very big work, but we are really happy with it. We think, yeah, it can be transformed into concrete policy tools. So if there is any question, I will be happy to answer it.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm really amazed with the work that you have performed and the output that you produce. So I'm using this opportunity to give the floor to the participants to say that I'm really amazed with this card that you present us to show the importance of rural areas. So like while we were presenting, I'm thinking, like, because we have a decreasing trend of the students who are applying for the agricultural universities in this region. I'm thinking this card can be used also as a kind of promotional tool to show that rural is not only agriculture, it's a way beyond that, and it's amazing. Now I will give the floor to the participants if someone want to ask the question or have some comments or something like that. Any participant? If not, I'll have additional question. At the beginning of your presentation, Michelle, you mentioned 3 categories of young population that you follow: newcomers, new entrants, and successors. Did you realize, is there any differences among that 3 groups that I mentioned and their desire to start some, let's say, different agricultural, not agricultural, but different business in rural areas?
Yes, thank you for the question. Indeed, what we have observed is, for instance, that okay, newcomers usually are those who do not want to start agricultural activity, but they have spot other type of economic opportunities linked to tourism, cultural heritage, or technologies applied to rural area or provide services in rural area. Then we have a new entrance into farming, which are people that, for instance, are really new into agricultural activity. So they want to establish a farm or acquire a farm, and of course, these people seek need of build competencies, and in some cases, people that really have no prior experience. So, and usually are people that, for instance, are willing to adopt more sustainable way of farming. So this is the type of profile. And when it comes to successors, usually are young people who are taking over the farm from a family, and for instance, who are addressing rather difficulties because they would like to introduce innovations or change the business model of the farm. And so they need support on one side on how to concretely establish, introduce innovation, but financially and technologically, but also how to address let's say the difficulties linked to the bond with the family, so how to break tradition and how to re-educate also not only maybe the workers and the environment around the farm. So these are, for instance, the difficulties of these three different profiles. And when it comes to entrance into farming, of course, the issue of access, how they can access land, those willing to establish a new farm is another important issue that is another important part of the work that has been done, which is, according to us, really a policy urgent to be addressed both by the European Union and the national policymakers. And I would like to highlight that indeed has been an amazing work, but that has been done by the whole consortium. So there have been a lot of organization and people working on this.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michelle. I don't know about other participants. Still no comments, no questions.
Hi. I work with Michelle in ruralization, but I just wanted to I comment on something because now, Alan, you mentioned how it would be a nice idea to actually use the rural trends with students. And actually, one of the plans that one of our partners has at the moment is they want to organize a grassroots event with the students at the University of Galway. And one of the ideas is actually to use these rural trends in kind of like more in an interactive way to open a discussion and debate. So of course we will also disseminate how this works and how it turns out. But of course, we also think that it's the ideas that rural trends can be actually used to open debate, and especially among young people who might be interested in becoming a new entrant or a newcomer.
Great. Thank you, Marlene. So if there's no additional questions or comments, Michelle, you want to say something?
No, well, just to say that if anybody has doubts, can still write us, and we would be glad to answer.
Okay, great. Then we can slowly close down this webinar. Thank you once again, Michelle, for your time and for your great presentation. Very concise, very precise, and very detailed one. And I'm really amazed with the elements that you present. While you're presenting, I'm also looking for all the other deliverables that you present, that you created in your consortium, and it's an amazing tool, and it should be promoted. I was following the ruralization project, but I'm not familiar with all the activities that you have performed. So
I thank you, Alan. Thank you really for giving us the opportunity to share this work. Just for information, there is another project which is closing now, which is called RURALIZATION, which is focused on rural development, but linked to cultural heritage, which is also has produced a lot of very interesting results, and we are partnering this project. And we are going to start a new project on the role of women in rural area. So we will, with the project called Fliara, there is nothing still done, but just for you to know, and if you are interested on the issue of women, very soon we will have the webpage and we'll start sharing things.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that information with us.
Thanks.
And thank you for all the participants for joining us and for the listening to the webinar.
Thank you. Have a good
Bye.
day.
Bye.
Thank you.